Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of ShiftED podcast. Today, I have a real treat for you guys out there. I have Kahn coming in, a doctorate from MIT of the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And he just put this great book out called The Learner's Apprentice, AI and the Amplification of Human Creativity. This came out on Constructed Modern Knowledge Press. I recommend this book highly. Chocked full of great examples of how AI can be integrated almost seamlessly into our teaching practices in our schools. So Ken, thanks so much for hopping on here and joining us today.
Yeah, I'm very glad to do it.
So Ken, what are just to kind of like build a foundation on which our conversation will go, what were the key points in AI's kind of history that you could tell us of key important developments or aha moments that AI had in the course of its history so far?
Yeah, so I was interested in AI even as an undergraduate, and then I was lucky enough to get into the MIT AI lab in the 70s. And my intent was to just do AI, but then I met Seymour Papert, and I was sort of part-time with the Logo Group, interested in enabling children to create interesting computer programs, as well as doing AI. As a matter of fact, I started merging the ideas, and I probably wrote the first paper on the topic in 1977, which was called Three Interactions Between AI and Education.
Hmm.
And even way back then, I was interested in generative AI. My doctoral thesis from MIT, the title of it was The Creation of Computer Animation from Story Description. So it's very much like today's text to video
Right.
models. But the AI was so different back then that you had to hand code all of the knowledge and all the heuristics and processes, and you sort of reflected on how maybe you might do it and then try to write a program to emulate that. And that was my view of AI until about 10 years ago, when I started to pay attention to neural nets. My first thought was that neural nets are such too low level. It's like the equivalent of the transistors in the computer rather than a high level programming language like JavaScript or Python or something. But I started to see how it was starting to do interesting things. And the first thing I thought of was to add to a programming language the ability to give non-expert programmers, children especially, the ability to take advantage of all these advances in AI. So I started with the Snap programming language, which probably should have been called Scratch Senior because it's very much like Scratch, but more advanced. And I added over 100 blocks, some of which would do speech recognition or image recognition, or you could define a neural net and train it and evaluate it. And you could also load in lots of pre-trained models so that any of the models that are out there, you could bring them into the browser and use them. So that was my focus up until 2 or 3 years ago, when I started playing with GPT. And then when ChatGPT came out, I started to ask myself the question, if I went over the many, many sample programs that I had built in Snap using my blocks, what would the experience be like if I role played a student that didn't have my expertise? How well could they recreate these apps? And it went very well, and that led me to 2 years of exploring this and then writing the book about it.
Well, so when you're saying that too, because I saw an example that you gave and I found it really interesting. You made this nonsense generator just
Right, yes.
through Claude, I think it was.
Right.
And then you added sound to it. And all of this was just you typing in, right? Like create
Yes,
a nonsense
yes.
machine, boom, spits it out, creates the code for it all. You can go look at the code to see what it looks like. And then you modified it to add sound to it. Something so simple like that back then would have taken like some time. I
Yes, that's
imagine.
very true. That's actually the first example in the book.
Okay.
And the
Mhm.
important one important point is that it was so easy to communicate to Claude, and I tried it with ChatGPT too, to just say a simple sentence like make a web app that will generate nonsense words.
Mm.
And the word web app is kind of important here because the idea is that you want a web page, an HTML page that has some JavaScript interactivity, but that you could run right there in the browser. You could share it with people. Also, it's perfectly safe because it's just like any other web page. The browser kind of protects you from malware or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then what even makes it more appropriate to do web apps is in the last several months, both ChatGPT and um, Claude and Gemini from Google, they all enable you, if you ask for a web app, they'll split the screen and you could just see the web app right there in the right half of your screen,
Right.
try it out. And if it's working well, then, and like in this case, I said, well, could you have the web app speak the word?
Mm-hmm.
And it knows all about these APIs and how to connect to speech utterances um, and then just to be playful, then I said, well, could you have it speak the Gettysburg Address, but every third word replaced with a nonsense word? And it knew Gettysburg Address, knew how to pick the third word. And, you could go on from there. You might even imagine moving to something that isn't just frivolous like this. So maybe you want an app that would help you come up with names for pets. And then
Right.
if you ask for that, it'll, modify the generator to be more appropriate for pet names or something. So,
Amazing.
and that's what's nice about that example is it's, 5 or 10 minute little playing around, and it doesn't require any expertise.
Right.
And the book is full of examples that go from that simple to ones that took a whole week to build because like the one that was the most ambitious, uh, it was called Emoji Adventures, and actually that name was a suggestion from a chatbot. After we built it, I said, "What can we call this?" But you start off with the mouse or your finger painting random emojis on the screen, but then you could speak things like um, spell AI, and then all the emojis will move either to an A or an I, and you see AI with made out of emojis. Or you could click a button and say dance, and it by default will load a song, and it was actually a song generated by a different generative AI. And then it knew how, and I didn't know this. It was quite interesting back and forth with the chatbot to get it so that it picks up the beats from the music, and then the emojis, rotate to kind of fit the beat.
Right.
And then I said, well, could we add a black hole? And all the emojis sort of fall into the black hole, and some of them will get into an orbit around it. And then and some of these were my idea. I
Mm-hmm.
think that actually the spelling one was its idea because I was asking for suggestions. Another idea I had was chasing. So every emoji picks a random other emoji and tries to chase it, and all the emojis are running. And with modern computers, you could have 1,000 emojis all flying around
Right.
on the screen like this.
That's great.
Um,
I love
and
that.
one last thing that it did was it loaded a database of 2,000 descriptions of 2,000 emojis. And then you could just speak and you could say uh, a sad face, and it'll find one that matches sad face, even if it's not an exact match. So it knew how to load in a pre-trained model that could be used to see if two bits of text, how similar they are, and if it's similar enough, or if it actually finds the one that's most similar and shows you, makes that the current emoji that you create. So it was quite a fun project to sort of push how far you could go.
For sure.
And it did take a week, but it's a 1,000-line big
Right.
program that's
Right.
really quite
Right.
functional.
And I guess that's kind of like the beauty of it as well, because you can really go down that rabbit hole once you start to see something generate, like how much more can I just keep twisting and adding? And it brings me to this quote that comes, I think, from the book or somebody that reviewed it, but I want to read it to you and then get your response to it.
Okay.
It says, "This is not a book about fantasies of replacing teachers with machines. Rather, the learner's apprentice model generates AI as an apprentice, colleague, co-thinker, proofreader, pair coder, brainstorming buddy, and illustrator, an intellectual ally that amplifies human potential." I mean, is that something amazing or what? Can you
Yeah,
put that put some context to that quote
yeah,
that
yeah. So, in the process of exploring this and then writing the book,
Hmm,
the first big discovery was that unlike all these people that talk about prompt engineering, we have to carefully design maybe a paragraph long description of exactly what you want and then hope it makes it. And that doesn't often work well because the description is fairly complex. Instead, the approach that works throughout is to think up what's the simplest version of what you want, ask for
hmm,
that, and then when you see it, if give feedback if it's fine, think up some improvement and just keep iterating. And sometimes you could think up improvements, sometimes you could ask for suggestions,
hmm,
and it's still you're being creative. As a matter when you ask for suggestions, often you get 10 different ones, and only one or two did I feel like I like and want to
hmm,
pursue.
hmm,
And so that's the style of creating apps. But the book
hmm,
also talks about how you could create text-based adventures or have various kinds of very different kind of conversations than normal. So the
right,
text-based adventures is like the old adventures where you would say, open the door, use the key or whatever. But
hmm,
now the chatbot's making it up on the fly, and it can be anything that you ask for. I've asked for, I want to witness the assassination of Julius Caesar, or I want to visit ancient Athens and talk to Socrates and visit
hmm,
the theater of Dionysus or something. Or another example that I did was I said, I'm a high school student who is just learning French, but and I really like science fiction. I want to have an adventure where I have to practice some French. And it created a nice thing where I'm the captain of the ship, and suddenly
hmm,
there's some object coming up in the viewer. And at first, the French was a little too hard, so I just simply said, "This is too hard. Do it, make it simpler French."
hmm,
And then, um, I wanted usually with these adventures, it follows the old thing of it gives you like four choices and you could pick them, but you
right,
could say anything. And I even said in this case, I don't want the choices. I want to have to force myself to express in French.
hmm,
So I said, I want to talk to the science officer, but my French was so rusty that it was like three mistakes in that. And instead of correcting my mistakes, it said, "Oh, you want to talk to the science officer?" And it wrote that in perfect French with the grammar fixed and the spelling fixed. And so I could
that's
see,
amazing.
what I did wrong.
Yeah,
And then when I
that
asked
is so
if
cool.
every so often to make illustrations, and it made some really nice science fiction illustrations where you see the deck of the ship and what's in front and all this.
Right.
So that's a whole class of kinds of creative things you could do. Where
Hmm,
unlike the some of the other examples, like creating an app or creating an illustrated story,
hmm,
it's the conversation itself that's the point,
right.
not the product. You're just learning by exploring. And I often get asked, how are you supposed to assess things like this?
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.
the if it's an historical visit to like ancient Athens, I think if I was a teacher, I would ask the students not just to uh, hand in a log of the conversation, but to reflect on what was going on and to also to be responsible for catching mistakes. So if the in the um, visiting viewing Julius Caesar's assassination,
Hmm.
um, it does allow me as a high school student to sneak into the Senate, hide behind a pillar, and watch it. But then, if you take the entire conversation and add it, give it to a different chatbot, say, "Is this conversation plausible?" it said everything was historically right, but there's the security had been so tight that you couldn't have snuck in to see this. But it even said, but that's dramatic license. That's okay or something.
That's cool. It's amazing. Do you find that different chatbots react differently to the same prompt? Like you'd give it the same kind of information, but it might react differently or produce different results for you?
Yeah, they always do. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
even the same one will react differently. I illustrated this in the book by just simply saying, uh, asking the same chatbot, create a haiku about creative uses of AI, and it made a nice little haiku, and then did it again, and it was, only one or two words similar or something.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but you do start to, it's very hard to give any recommendations about these chatbots because a few months ago I would have said, "Oh, Claude is so much better than the others,"
Mm,
and now in the last month or so, ChatGPT and Gemini have kind of caught up in a lot of ways, but I still think Claude tends to be better for creative writing, and
mm,
there's a strange sense in which its personality seems a little bit more attractive, but
right.
but which reminds me, one of the advice I give the students is you don't need any special skill to use a chatbot. You
Mm,
should just interact with it the same way you would interact with a person, a, a fellow student or a
right.
assistant or something. But that because that's the most effective way of interacting with them is that way. But keep in mind that it's not a person. It's got a very alien intelligence.
Right.
Um,
Right.
keep that in mind.
Somebody told me that if you are very polite in a chatbot, thank you, please. I'd love to know what you, you
Yeah,
could
right.
provide that it has, that it's more, I don't know, it's better results or what happens, but that being polite is a good thing to be in the chatbots, just for digital citizenship as well. At the same time,
Yes.
like putting things, what you put online. Very cool. What do you see as the untapped potential that we have with chatbots that we might not be there yet in education with? I know that I talk a lot with educators about using chatbots to help
Mhm.
them and simplify their teaching protocols they have to go through. It allows you to have more time with your students as well, where that human connection happens.
Mhm.
They're getting there, but like they still have a hard time understanding like what it can do, like other than, make me a lesson plan on electricity or,
Right.
like what do you think that untapped potential that we have in chat that we still need to get closer to?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, first off, I think the best match is with project-based kinds of
Mm-hmm.
learning because you could be as creative as you need to be or want to be, and you also learn a lot of critical thinking. You have to give good feedback to the chatbot. You're learning communication skills because the better you communicate, the better, more effective the conversation will be. Um, so I think that's the most important thing is to just treat it as a as a colleague that you're trying to that's helping you make projects.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of flexibility as to what exactly its role is and what your role is. And you could
Mm-hmm.
start off saying, oh, I don't want you to do too much. I want to do some of the uh, writing, but you should do some of the illustrations or whatever, you want to, however you want to split up the work.
Mm-hmm.
You could also, like with writing, I've asked for it to generate a story. And sometimes these stories I try to connect up with mathematics or science. One example that I probably overdid in the book is stories and poems and um, musicals all about Euclid's proof that there's an infinite number of prime numbers. And uh, you can do it so many different ways, but you could also, once you get it, if you see anything wrong, you could, or ideas for improvement, you could give it critical feedback and improve things. So,
Right.
or you could ask it to, or a different chatbot, how could this be improved? And then you decide
Mm,
which improvements you might want to do. So you're acting very much like the editor
right.
in that case, unless the writer, but of course you could be the writer and let the chatbot be the editor.
Right.
You got all these
Interesting.
flexible different ways of interacting. And so,
Right. Right. You can kind of wear whatever hat you want and
yes,
assign that other one to the bot
right.
itself. So cool. I have a question that teachers ask me, and I'm wondering maybe you might have an answer to it. So all these chatbots are built on input, right? Stuff
Right.
that we fed it.
Mm-hmm.
Where does the copyright come into play? Like, because I know that it takes it, indexes it all, so it basically splices everything in all these little pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you allowed? Like, if I'm making a chatbot, what what am I ethically allowed to put into it? Like, I can't put your book into it, but can
Right.
I like where does that line blur a bit?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's one issue has to do with what was the training data that
Mm,
the developers of the chatbot used and whether they were really respecting the creators, copyrights or whatever.
mm-hmm,
So, one thing I say in the book when it comes to, say, image generation
mm-hmm,
is um, you could ask, some of them will create, you know, an image for maybe a game you're creating, and you could ask it, to have it in the style of Picasso, say, and it'll
right,
do it. But
yep,
that's still in copyright. But if you ask for Van Gogh or Rembrandt, I don't think any ethical, moral issues there. They've been out of copyright for a century or more or
right,
whatever.
right,
Um, and when it comes to making web apps, I think it I don't think there's much of a ethical issue or copyright issue because it's been trained on millions of open source programs
mm,
and got the idea of how to write code. But that does lead to a point where I wanted to I did make in the book, which is if you ask it for a tic-tac-toe program or a snake game or something, it'll
mm,
do it, but you're not going to learn much, and it's probably just based on the hundreds of examples it's seen on the web or something. But if you ask for a game that you make up, like a very simple game that I made up
mm-hmm,
was one where there were flowers on the bottom, and the flowers start shrinking and losing their color, turning gray. But you could drop colorful water balloons on them, and if you hit one, then they get bigger and more colorful again. And it's just dropping water balloons on flowers. I couldn't find a game like that anywhere, but it was able to
right,
make it. And
right. So does that become your game? Like, or is
yeah,
that just again freely available to anybody online?
yes,
Like,
yes. Matter of fact, what we did in the book was, for all the conversations, um, often we had to abridge them or summarize them because, many of them are pretty long. But there's
right,
an online appendix that has the entire conversations, but also has link to any app or
mm,
story or images made. So everything that we talk about in the book, you could go to the online appendix and get the
okay,
full version or play with my water balloon game. Or another game that I think was a bit more impressive that still wasn't that hard to make is one where asked it to display the video with the camera, what's the coming from the camera, so you see
mm,
yourself just like you do in Zoom, but then to have cartoon balloons falling from the sky, and if you touch them with your finger, they pop.
mm,
And then there's a little scorekeeping. If you miss five,
right,
you lose the game. And if
mm,
however many you pop, you get more points. And it has
mm.
a little popping sound when you hit them. So, but what's interesting about that is that in order to build that, the chatbot had to think, well, how am I going to figure out if somebody's finger is touching an artificial balloon or a virtual
Right,
balloon?
right,
And it knew about a pre-trained AI model called hand pose that is able to pick out every joint in a finger and a hand, and and then it was able to figure out, where would the tip of the finger be, and if it's close enough to the balloon, it pops or something. So
Hmm.
uh,
That's interesting.
augmented reality, just by asking for it or something.
Yeah, sounds like a scratch game that I've made in the past.
Yep.
That's so cool. Well, Ken, I want to just thank you again. I mean, this I could just keep talking and talking with you, but I want to respect our time as
Right.
well. Um, this book is really, really insightful, and I think it's the kind of book that will open doors for teachers to start understanding a little bit of how that integration can happen. Um, we're still kind of in that no fly zone a lot with our students because of the age restrictions
Mhm.
that some of these, well, most of these bots have right now. Hopefully that will change in the future. I imagine it will as we get more of a handle on it. Um, but I just found that your book was just full of great ideas, and it was really cool to talk to you and for you to kind of share the origin and the development. And maybe just in closing, Ken, what are you looking for in 2025? Like, are you continuing to test these out and share your project ideas and information like that to the world?
Yeah, I am. But let me comment first what you said. First off, I think one of the first things teachers should pick up from the book is that
Mm.
it's very easy to experiment, try things yourself, and see,
Right.
what kinds of things you could do. And if there are these kind of constraints because of age or whatever,
Mm.
I think there's a lot of things you could do with the whole class where the
Right.
teacher is controlling the chatbot and the students are giving suggestions and everybody's watching what's happening or something. So there's a lot of possibilities there.
Yep.
So in terms of the future, um, just every day there seems to be new advances, and I'm always trying them out. The one that I'm particularly find interesting is having multiple chatbots communicate with each other, but some of them have different roles. And I
Mm.
did an experiment just playing around where one of them is a really good programmer, but another one is a very creative digital artist who thinks out of the box and wants to do some computer art and music. And the two of them just go back and forth. And I'm watching, but I could type in as a third
Right.
person in this conversation. And the times I've tried this, they actually produced, a pretty interesting little digital art piece with some odd
Wow.
music and some, animation and stuff. So
Amazing.
that's the
Wow.
thing I'm most interested in exploring right now is what you could do with multiple chatbots. And
Mm.
if you don't have, you could have the simplest way of experimenting with this is to copy and paste between two different tabs, where one tab has one chatbot, another tab is a different one, and they could be the
Right.
same chatbot or different ones. But the important thing
Mm.
is the initial prompt kind of sets up the context and for
Right.
each one, right?
Right. And do you offer suggestions for prompting chatbots in the book as well? Like
Yeah, I
effective
do.
prompts and stuff like that?
Right,
Because
right.
that's a
So,
skill in itself, right?
well, it is, but and it isn't in some ways
Mm.
because uh, you can, carefully craft a prompt and it could be useful. But so often I find that equally good to just get started, just say something simple, and then it maybe
Mm.
half understands, and then you say, "No, I meant this," and you can, and then you add some more constraints or more details. It's just it comes out in a conversation rather than as a
Mm.
initial careful prompt. But there is another kind of prompting which we call guidance prompting, where you could say to the chatbot just in the very beginning, you're going to be helping some middle school students that are, say, making some web games around biology. Ask them if they have any ideas. If they don't, ask them what their interests are. Make a few suggestions.
Mm.
If they have too complicated an idea, encourage them to come up with a simpler version. And
Right.
don't do too much work for them, but be as helpful as you can and explain things, in the age appropriate language. You just two paragraphs like that to kind of set the context and the constraints, and then you could have a kind of a customized version of that chatbot that's ideal um, for that classroom
Right.
experience.
I love that idea too of popping it up on the smartboard and having the kids, so they're not touching anything, but
Yes.
they're able to participate in the
Yeah.
prompting and the developing and seeing that change. I
Yes.
think that they would be like, oh my God, wow, this is amazing. Not to
Yeah.
say they wouldn't want to go home and try it at home where,
Yeah.
what can
Well,
you do?
hopefully
But
they will be able to with their parents'
right.
permission and parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Ken, again, thanks so much. Uh, People, go out and get this book, The Learner's Apprentice: AI in the Amplification of Human Creativity. It's a wonderful book, tons of great ideas in there. And Ken, I thank you for putting this out there. It's really something else, this book. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. I enjoyed it. Good.
Yeah, it was really great. Thanks so much, and have a great day.
All right. Thanks. Bye.